So, welcome to the second talk of this retreat. Tonight, as I mentioned earlier, I'd like to talk about serenity meditation. And some ways we can practice it, basically. In that process, I'll also be talking about joy and spiritual pleasure, by the way. So, but before I do that, I want to kind of reiterate these different aspects of meditation, the two different qualities we cultivate with meditation. And I've said a little bit about that this morning, and also last night, Lisa talked about it a little bit, and I mentioned it yesterday. So I have written lists over the years, and they've got bigger and bigger, like comparison lists, like serenity on this side and insight on that side. And I'm just going to go through some points that I would like to make about these two aspects of meditation, which support each other. They're very different, and they support each other on this process of awakening. Actually, there's three paths to awakening. The first path is serenity first, then insight. And that's the path the Buddha chose, or the path the Buddha practiced. Serenity first, and then insight. And in this way, he cultivated very refined states of mind, very concentrated states of mind, so he could look into experience powerfully with insight. Another way is insight only. And insight only is sometimes called dry insight, and it's probably is best understood as what happens when we practice the four establishments of mindfulness. And it's a path to awakening. It's a really powerful path to awakening. But it's called insight only because we don't consciously cultivate states of concentration. We don't consciously or purposefully cultivate serenity. Except in practice, what you find insight meditation teachers will teach, they will teach loving kindness, compassion, appreciative joy, and equanimity as divine abodes. And they're in fact serenity practices. I remember when I practiced in Burma with Ujjanika, Sayadaw Ujjanika. It's very, very insight-only practice, but he strongly recommended we practice metta. And he described it like, he said, insight's really dry. Insight only is really dry. It's like, like cracked mud. It's just, it's really not very joyous. And he said, when you practice metta, it kind of lubricates it. It softens it up. Now, I thought that was a nice little analogy. And the other pathway, the third pathway, is a pathway I really enjoy and appreciate. It's serenity and insight co-joined, of which mindfulness of breathing is an example. The 16 steps of mindfulness of breathing is an example of this sense of serenity and insight co-joined. So, the differences. On the calm side, or the serenity side, there's a sense of integration and absorption, like stabilizing your attention, stabilizing your awareness, and integrating, like you sort of come together. Like some people say, get yourself together. But it's like that. You kind of gather yourself around something. It's sort of consolidating. Whereas with the insight end of the spectrum, it's dismantling and deconstructing. So, with, say, an example of this would be an insight approach to a particular problem. You would look at it and you dismantle it and you deconstruct to see the basic components of it so you can see clearly what's going on. That makes sense. With the serenity approach, there's sustained attention on a single object. And you can choose an object, like you could do sustained attention on the breathing, and I would call that anapana samadhi. Like anapana means breathing, and samadhi means concentration. Normally the sutta that I'm using for mindfulness of breathing is called anapanasati practice. So sati means mindfulness. So if you have sustained attention on an object, what tends to happen is everything else falls away and you become absorbed into that object. That's the process of samadhi. So it's just one object. And of course, I think I've mentioned it a couple of times, the practices of the Four Divine Abodes are practices, they're falling within the serenity kind of understanding of meditation. Because you choose an object, such as the sign of metta, like the felt sense of metta or loving kindness. There's a felt sense of loving kindness. And there's a felt sense of compassion. There's a felt sense of appreciative joy. And there's a felt sense of peace or equanimity. So what we do is we find that felt sense, that sign of that experience, and we absorb into it, and it absorbs into us so that we become one with that quality. This is serenity practice. Whereas coming to insight, multiple objects. And you can go from one object to another, object to another, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't have to be a single object. Sometimes you just focus on a single object to see the nature of it. But the objects can change. The thing with calm meditation practices is unity, like coming together. The thing with, as I mentioned earlier, the thing with insight meditation is a deconstruction, like I mentioned. In the literature, calm meditations are also called directed meditations. Directed in that we're finding an object and we're directing our mind to it. It's kind of like we're putting energy into not holding on to it, but directing our energy to this particular object. Whereas with insight meditation, it's called undirected, meaning that we're not doing anything. We're more passively and directly experiencing it. It's like you're sitting back and you're letting it come to you. You're not trying to do it. You're not trying to go into it. It's arising through your observation. What we perceive with serenity meditations is stillness and silence. What we receive with insight meditations are anicca, dukkha, anatta, impermanence, dukkha, nature, and also not self or emptiness. And we also perceive dependent arising, which I mentioned, I can't remember when I mentioned it, was it this morning or last night? This morning. Okay, so dependent arising, which is this principle behind how things arise and also how they cease. The emphasis with absorption, with serenity is samadhi. Remember me taking you through that spectrum? The emphasis is concentration or samadhi. And I'll talk about samadhi a little bit later, but basically samadhi comes from the word samatha. And if you break that word down into syllables, it refers to coming together and placing the mind or mental energies in one direction, in one thing. So it's coming together, gathering attention, composing your attention or your mental energies in a unified way, and you're putting it in one direction. So that's getting a sense of what happens with samadhi. Whereas the emphasis with insight meditation is more about mindfulness, being present with experience, tracking experience. We track experience with our awareness so that we see what happens with it. We see how it changes. With serenity, it gives muscle to insight, and insight gives direction to serenity. Sometimes we can just practice serenity and that's it. Sometimes we can go down wayward pathways, sort of pathways that may not be so helpful and even destructive. A concentrated mind is quite a powerful mind, and some people who are into black magic, for example, can develop powerful, concentrated minds and do harmful things. In addition, we have to be very concentrated if we want to rob a bank or murder someone or something like that, something terrible like that. So sometimes concentration is not always wholesome. It's called wrong concentration, or miccha samadhi in Pali. But if we have insight, it can kind of protect our samadhi, it can give it direction in what we're doing. So they kind of work with each other. The serenity approach, it's called, there's a Pali term that's called cetto vumutti, and it means, technically it means a liberated mind. Cetto vumutti, liberated mind. If you go into it, the way it's explained, it's not the same as nibbana, which is a completely liberated mind, but it's more like a temporary liberation. It's like we experience like we're liberated, but it's not enduring. It's pretty cool anyway. It's like a temporary waking up. So with absorption practices, you can experience, with absorption practice, I'm calling them absorptions, serenity practices, you can experience this temporary liberation. Like when you're in samadhi, the hindrances are at bay and your mind is clear. And if you're practicing the divine abodes, they become boundless and they become your state of being. It's almost like a non-dual state of being. I guess you could say it's a non-dual. Theravadan Buddhism doesn't use that terminology, duality. But if it were to use it, it would be considered as a non-dual state. So you're like an enlightened being. And the way insight liberates, we need insight to liberate completely. And it liberates through wisdom, through insight. The other thing about the temporary liberation from the serenity practices is that when we're in samadhi, the sense cravings and also the cravings related to being something or cravings to push away something, they all become reduced, they all get cooled, they all reduce. So there's a freedom experience when we have no craving or limited craving. This last one, this is really interesting. I only heard about this one when I was doing practices with Stephen Snyder. The serenity practices are thought to purify the mind, purifying the mind, whereas the insight practices purify view. Now, what does all that mean? Well, right view is being able to see experience as conditioned phenomena as impermanent, not self and suffering, and also being able to see that actions have results, actions have consequences. There's a conditionality in life, seeing conditionality. Wrong view is the opposite of that. I mean, there's a lot of people with lots of wrong views. There's millions, well, thousands of different types of views, hundreds of different types of views. But one way of understanding wrong view is that we take permanent things that are not permanent. We believe things to be permanent that are not permanent. We take things to be the source of enduring happiness that cannot be the source of enduring happiness. And we take things to be self or a thing that are not a self, that are not a thing. We also don't have, what do you call it, a belief, or we don't have an understanding of dependent arising, meaning we don't appreciate the reality of karma. Karma literally means actions, and actions have results. Actions have consequences. There's a cause-effect relationship with everything. Everything arises because of causes and conditions, and it goes on to cause and condition other processes. So it's a basic feeling like you can get away with murder. Like you can do an unwholesome act, for example, and be off scot-free. As long as nobody knows about it, I'm not going to go in prison, I'm not going to get punished, I'm scot-free. But the reality is that it does linger. There's something lingers in your consciousness. It's this, so wrong view involves believing that we can get away with unwholesome acts without there being any consequences. So insight, being able to see the reality of things, it develops this right view, and right view is actually, I mean, no way you could describe right view, is as insight. And the wisdom component of the Eightfold Path involves right view and right intention. I'll just go over the Eightfold Path again. When we can see things clearly for what they are, even if, I'll talk in a relative sense here, we can see a pattern that we might be having in life, and we can see that it's not so helpful. And us seeing it clearly influences our intentions or our motivations to do something different. I mean, it could be something really simple, like, every time you go to the supermarket, you buy a chocolate. But you know the chocolate's not good for you. And, one day you see that the chocolate's not really good for you. It's got a lot of sugar, and, I mean, there's a lot of chocolate that's very good for you. But, if you're like me, chocolate's not good for you. So you go to the shop every day and you're doing this pattern, and one day you see this, this is not a very helpful pattern. And you see it clearly, you see it's just causing you more suffering. Like for me, I get psoriasis. The more I eat chocolate, the more psoriasis I get. Can you see my arms? Maybe you can't see them. I get it on my knees and my scalp sometimes. So chocolate's a trigger for that. So when we can see something's happening with us, it's like having a right view, then we can make a decision to act in a suitable way. And that decision is what we could call right intention. This is at a very fundamental relative level. I'm talking about this. And so with our good understanding and our good intentions, we act in ways that with our body, speech and mind that are in line with our good understanding and best intentions. So we could call that right speech, right action, right livelihood. And when we do that, we have a mental composure to cultivate our minds and strengthens our minds and develop our minds, which is called meditation, effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. And what that does, it helps to produce wisdom. This Eightfold Path goes in a cycle. So that's how it works at a very fundamental level. I could say at an ennobling level, that's how it works. At a relative level, that's how this Eightfold Path works. So when we practice insight meditation, when we use some inquiry to investigate what's going on, we see clearly, it purifies our view. And it leads to complete liberation eventually. Because it's like a wheel that flows towards liberation, or rolls towards liberation. So what do I mean by purifying mind? Okay. Well, with serenity meditation practices, what you do is you make a choice to attend to one thing and not another thing. It's a choice. You direct your attention on one thing or another thing. And I'm going to access the understanding of neuroscience here. There's a saying in neuroscience, or there's two sayings in neuroscience. They go something like this. Use it or lose it. And the other saying is, neurons that fire together wire together. And what that means is that the more we do something, the more that the reflections of that in our brain grow. Like we can grow neurons, there's neuroplasticity, we can grow neurons with our attention and with our actions. I usually bring up this understanding of playing the guitar. I sometimes try to play the guitar. I've been doing it for a long time, but every now and then I just put the guitar down and I don't play it. But when I do play it, I notice that I get better and better. And I think that in my mind, or in my brain, sorry, I should say my brain, I'm sure that there's neurons growing that reflect that motor movement and the understanding of music and the beat and the rhythm and reading the notes on the page. So I'm growing neurons with steering my attention to that particular activity. And the opposite of that is also true. If I don't play the guitar for a while, and I haven't played it for about 4 or 5 months now, it's kind of back to square one. I lose those neurons because there's a natural tendency for the brain to cull itself. To unused neurons, they just cull away. They disappear. So it's like that with our attention. The more we attend to something, the more that possibility will grow. And in fact, there's been studies done by this. Imagining something, say imagining you're playing the guitar, actually potentiates the neurons to fire in that direction, if that makes sense. So, and on the opposite of that, if we notice a particular pattern of thought, a particular habit, and we decide, okay, I'm not going to follow that pathway, I'm not going to buy into that. Imagine, for example, we are plagued with ruminative thoughts or worrying thoughts, and it gives us great anxiety and depression. What we can do is, be aware of it. Oh, hello worrying thoughts. That's interesting. Not today. I've got something else to do. I'm going to put my attention here. And what this does is that it strengthens different pathways. That's on neurologically. So with meditation, with serenity meditation, we're choosing to strengthen a particular pathway, a mind pathway, if you like, a state of mind, a mental habit, and not feed into another state of habit. There's a saying, and I never quite quote it accurately, by William James, forefather of psychology. It says something like, what we attend to is reality. And I like to say, what we attend to becomes real for us. So if we're consumed with worrying thoughts, or consumed with thoughts filled with greed, ignorance and hatred, then that becomes our reality. If on the other hand, we don't go down that pathway, we intend not to feed into that pathway and feed into another pathway, then the other pathway becomes our reality. So with serenity meditation, what you're doing is you're purifying your mind because you're choosing to put your attention on the object. It could be a neutral object or an uplifting object. Usually objects of serenity meditation are either uplifting or kind of neutral. So in doing so, you're either strengthening the uplifted one, or if it's neutral, you're not feeding into the unhelpful one. So it's a really good way to heal. And that brings me to Rick Hanson's Heal. Many of you may have heard of Rick Hanson. And I'll just mention this kind of briefly. I didn't even know when I started. I don't even know how long I've been talking, so I don't want to talk too long. I don't want you people falling to sleep on me too early. Anyway, this kind of choice to not feed into the negative and feed into the positive, let's call them negative and positive, or the wholesome and unwholesome. Rick Hanson, who's an author and a neuropsychologist and a clinical psychologist, he's developed a kind of a protocol, and it goes something like this. It's HEAL, and HEAL refers to having a wholesome experience, enriching that experience, absorbing into that experience, and then linking it. Now, what does all that mean? Well, let's say we have an uplifted experience. We might have a moment of, we might see someone, a friend down the road, and we just have this moment of warm, loving kindness. It's so lovely to see them, have a smile on their face come up. So we've had an experience. What we can do with that is we can enrich it. We can enrich it by attending to it, being mindful of it, knowing how we experience this uplifted feeling, how we experience this quality of warm benevolence, being really curious about it. And also, if we're, maybe later on we saw a friend down the road and we had a great hug and had a bit of a chat, and then we're going home and we're by ourselves in a meditation room and we think, oh, what else happened there? Oh, there was these things that happened. So we bring to mind the sensory experience of it, and we bring it to mind as if it's happening right now. And then we have enriched it, we absorb into it. In other words, we marinate in that experience so that it becomes our reality. And the linking is by bringing up, and you can do this consciously, but I usually recommend just letting it happen organically and naturally. You bring up a moment where you may have experienced the opposites of warm benevolence, such as someone being really hurtful towards you, or you being hurtful towards yourself. And you pair those two experiences, and you pair them only when the wholesome experience is really strong, so that there's no chance for the unwholesome to. You pair them when they're really strong. And I'll give you an analogy of what I mean by this in a little while. And what happens is that the paired experience, the experience of what you're linking it to, that just fades away. It pales in comparison to the other experience. This actually explains a process called, in neuroscience, it explains a process called memory reconsolidation theory, and I won't go into that theory right now, but those psychologists here might like to look up that theory, or probably maybe even know about it. But memory consolidation theory is a way we overcome trauma, actually. So Rick Hanson developed this protocol for shifting negativity bias. Often we have a negativity bias. It's a evolutionary, it's developed through our evolution as a human, because at one stage in our evolutionary history, it was important to be aware of dangers. And it was important to make the right type of mistake. And this is an example. If I was in the jungles of 20,000 years ago, or even 5,000 years ago, it would be, to mistake a coiled vine as a snake is safer than to mistake a snake as a coiled vine. Yeah, got that? So we developed negativity bias, and we brought that through into modernity, and these days we have a lot of negativity bias. We tend to see the worst possible case scenarios, and we tend to be worried about all sorts of things. We'll ruminate and so on. So this process of heal is a way we can correct negativity bias. Does that make sense? So I'm talking about serenity here. I'm talking about serenity meditation. And the analogy I wanted to make is that if we have a tablespoon of salt and we put it into a glass of water and we try to drink the water, we can't drink it. You understand that? Yeah, that's true, isn't it? Most of you wouldn't want to drink it. If, however, we put a tablespoon of salt into a pristine lake, and then we get a glass and we take a scoop out of the lake and we have a drink, we can't even taste the salt, can we? This is the same analogy that I want to make about when we build up our psychological resources, and we can build them up with samadhi. When we build up our psychological resources, so much so that like a pristine lake of resources, and then we come along and link it to some really unfortunate experience that we might have had that's similar to that, on the same sort of theme of what we're cultivating. That's like putting that tablespoon of salt into the pristine lake. Do you get the analogy? Yeah. It's not my analogy, it comes out of the sutras actually, but it's in reference to something else. Okay, so there are, serenity is this, not only does it cultivate these different states of mind, not only does it change the way we see things by changing our consciousness, it is also a way we develop these highly refined altered states of consciousness called highly refined, highly concentrated altered states of consciousness called jhanas. Now jhanas are these states of concentration that develop via what's called 5 jhana factors. Now, I'm trying to get my words together here. The Buddha developed and taught the jhanas. And if you look in the sutras, you'll see the words for the jhanas in relationship to, jhanas are what we develop with serenity meditation. They are cultivated through samadhi. And that's the way the Buddha did it. He went through his 6 years of self-mortification, and he realized something was missing. And he reflected on an occasion in his childhood where he developed, he entered spontaneously into the first jhana. There are 8 jhanas. He entered spontaneously into the first jhana, and it was a place of contentment. It was free. It was free from sensual craving. It was uplifting. It was pleasant. And he thought, after his 6 years of self-mortification, he said, maybe that's the way. Maybe that's the way I can look into things. So he then went off and developed the jhanas, not the full 8 jhanas, but only to the 4th jhana. And I'll talk to you about the features of these jhanas in a minute. He cultivated to the fourth jhana, and from there he used the power of his mind to look into phenomena. He looked into dependent arising, and he woke up, basically. So when we're talking about jhanas, we're talking about that path of serenity first and then insight. And there are 8 in the sutras and in the various commentaries, there are 8 jhanas. 4 of them are called material jhanas, and 4 of them are called immaterial jhanas. They're called, the material jhanas are called that way because we can kind of feel them in our body. They're material, they're tangible physically. But with the immaterial jhanas, they're all of the mind, they're mentality only. So the features of the jhanas are like these. Feature of the first jhana is piti. Piti is the Pali term often translated as joy. And it is this rapturous feeling, and it can range from kind of sort of just very subtle, pleasant feelings to bliss. So piety, and I'll use the term piety or joy, it's felt throughout the whole body, and it's kind of energetic and uplifting. And so that's the first jhana. The second jhana, which is more refined than that one, the more refined we get our attention, the piety sort of dies away a little bit, in so much as the bubbly, energetic quality of the piety calms down a bit. And what we experience then is happiness, or sukha in Pali. And this happiness is more refined than the gross piety. It's more of an uplifted heart. I feel it in my heart, and it's this uplifted feeling of lightheartedness, like your heart's smiling. And then the third jhana involves happiness as well as equanimity. And it's more refined than the previous 2. And this one is called, I'll name it contentment. Sometimes people call it contentment, but it is a mix of equanimity, which is unshakable mind, and happiness. And it's much more refined than just happiness. It's a deep contentment. That's the best way I can explain it. And equanimity is the fourth jhana. This is the jhana that the Buddha cultivated. This is the level of the jhana the Buddha cultivated before he went into investigating into phenomena with insight and saw clearly the way things were. This is a state that's more refined, has no joy. I mean, that sounds a bit rough, but it's actually, the joy is too gross for equanimity. There's if anything, you could say peacefulness, but it's not even there's no valence like that. There's just this steady, still, quiet, unshaken, unperturbed mind. It's deeply peaceful. Now, I'll just talk to you about the immaterial jhanas, but I won't go into details about them. The fifth jhana is, the feature of that is infinite space. I won't go into explaining that. It's a perception of infinite space. So it's like, if you want to just go out, if you imagine infinitely, just sending your mind out there, it's this perception and absorption into the experience of infinite space. The sixth jhana is like doing a U-turn on that experience of infinite space and being absorbed into the consciousness of infinite space. So like when I talk about infinite space out there, I'm talking about it out there. But when I talk about consciousness of infinite space, it's like, oh, it's this consciousness that's infinitely spacious. The next jhana is nothingness. I won't go into details about that. The way Lee Brasington, one of my teachers, describes this is opening the cookie jar and there's nothing there. Or going to the basement, he's American, going to the basement and all the lights are turned off and there's nothing. There's nothing there, nothing. And the eighth jhana is called neither perception or non-perception. And I won't even try to explain that because I don't fully understand it myself. I don't know, I don't really understand it. Obviously I've never really experienced it fully, but I can get a sense of it. So, something about the jhanas, there's disagreement with scholar practitioners about how deep your concentration needs to go for it to be called a jhana. And essentially there's kind of two aspects of it, two kind of schools. One school goes with these commentaries that come in a really fat text called the Visuddhimagga. And at that level, the jhanas, the way they're described in that level, are so refined that they're very rare to attain. Not many people can attain them, not many people can achieve those states of mind. And it's really, really hard. They're super refined. And at the other side of the argument, the basic argument, is that there is aligned with what's described in the sutras. And what's described in the sutras is attainable by many. It requires just a bit of, requires practice and it takes a long time and one develops aspects of it. So Lee Brasington once compared the 8 jhanas to 8 different pools of water. Like you can imagine 8 pools, like swimming pools. And each pool has a deep end and a shallow end. And I'm going to quote what he said in a book by Shayla Catherine called Fearless and Focused. One may skim the surface of the water, wade in, swim on the surface, or dive in deep. However one enters, to whatever depth, the pools of water are just still the same pools. The 8 jhanas remain the same, even though the depth of the experience differs depending upon how one engages with them. So, when I first started meditating, I knew about the Visuddhimagga jhanas, and I tried at the age of about 19, 20, 21, to achieve these jhanas, and I just gave up. I mean, it was just so out there. It was so hard to achieve, and I was just receiving frustration after frustration. And I made the decision, what I did do was I developed insight, and insight was really wonderful. It was really, and I guess I became an insight meditation practitioner. And about 20 years later, I was reading the sutras. I was on a retreat somewhere. I was reading the sutras, and I was going, oh, that's what the sutras are saying about the jhanas. That's like my experience. I've had that experience. And I'd read further, and I've had similar experiences to that. Not as deep as what they're describing in the Visuddhimagga, and even maybe not as deep as what they're describing in the sutras. Sutras, by the way, are discourses of the Buddha and some of his disciples. And I thought, oh, this is really cool. So I started to get interested in it, and I started to practice it. And eventually I came across a book by Lee Brasington, and he talked about the jhanas. It's called Right Concentration, and it was accessible. It was accessible. So these days I like to practice the jhanas to whatever level they are for me, and sometimes I do practices and I call them emulating the jhanas. Emulating the jhanas. It's not quite like the jhanas, but it's good enough for me because it gives me a sense of well-being, and it also turbocharges my insight practice. So, there's a saying in the sutras like this: concentration has a proximal cause, happiness. Happiness has a proximal cause, tranquility. Tranquility has a proximal cause, rapture. Rapture has a proximal cause, gladness. Now I'm just going to go through that a little bit. What it's saying here is that gladness can lead to rapture. Rapture is another word for joy or piety. And piety can lead to tranquility. Tranquility. Tranquility can lead to happiness or sukha. And sukha can lead to concentration or samadhi, a unified mind. So what's gladness? And I think gladness, there are many different levels. And I'll mention these levels when we move through the 16 steps of mindfulness of breathing. And, well, in my view, spiritual pleasure is gladness. What's spiritual pleasure? You heard me talk about Vedana before, yesterday, or Vedana or feeling tone. The way the Buddha talks about this in the mindfulness practices is as pleasant, unpleasant, or neither. There's other categories that he puts on these feelings, and they are worldly or unworldly. So I'm going to describe unworldly as spiritual, okay? So, and I'm going to describe, the way I describe worldly is that the feeling qualities arise from and have the potential to keep you caught up in worldly activities. Like everyone, well, not everyone, but I like the taste of chocolate. It's pleasant. It's a pleasant taste of chocolate. It's arising from, that's called a worldly pleasant feeling. So it kind of keeps me bound to the world. Unworldly pleasant feelings are those sorts of feelings that arise from activities that are on the path to awakening. An easy way of developing a spiritual pleasant feeling is concentration. Gathering your mind together. What happens is that it's naturally pleasant. It's like you know how you relax a bit. It's kind of a pleasant feeling. Does anybody ever relaxed here? There's a pleasant feeling. So this pleasant feeling is helpful. Now, what about unworldly, unpleasant feelings? And worldly unpleasant feelings, well, worldly pleasant, unpleasant feelings, pretty easy. Just the getting hurt, being hit, or just damage to our body. That's an unworldly. It's a worldly unpleasant feeling. But an unworldly pleasant feeling could be in the service of something liberating. So, I'll give you an example of this. Yesterday I was driving here, and I felt I'd had a piece of chocolate earlier in the day, and my mouth was a little bit greasy, and I wanted to cut it. And I usually have extra chewing gum in my console. So I was driving along and I searched around for it, and there wasn't any chewing gum there. So I had to sit with this sense of really wanting some chewing gum, but it not being there. And I thought, oh, this is interesting. This is unpleasant. Yet it became an unworldly pleasant feeling. An unworldly unpleasant feeling, or a spiritual unpleasant feeling, because I thought, all I have to do is hang in there with this, turn my attention to it, and it can change to freedom. And it doesn't last long. It was in the service of me being liberated. It was in the service of me having some detachment about the experience of having some piece of chewing gum in my mouth and chewing it, and that taste.
Can you understand that? So when we're coming to gladness now, I think spiritual pleasure is a cause for piety. Piety is a cause for tranquility. Tranquility is a cause for happiness. Happiness is a cause for deep samadhi. So there's something else I want to talk to you about in terms of, now, we use this, we can use this, sorry by the way, we can use this. So when I had instructions on how to cultivate the jhanas with Lee Brasington, he said, get your mind really concentrated. Get your mind really, really concentrated. So I spent hours and weeks. I went on a retreat for 7 weeks once, and I was just focusing on doing this. So about 2 weeks from just concentrating. And then he said, when you have some pleasant feeling, when you're really concentrated, find something pleasant in your body. Oh, well, that's pretty easy. My body's feeling really relaxed and all the rest of it. So, and he said, focus on that. So I focused on that without trying to make anything happen. And then he said, tell me what happens. So I did that, and I noticed some joy arise. Isn't that interesting? And then I focused on the joy. Then I noticed some happiness rise. Well, actually, my body mind got quite tranquil. I noticed some happiness arise. So I focused on that. And then I noticed contentment. Then I noticed deep peace. So it's this, we're working through the jhanas here, starting with a pleasant feeling, a spiritual pleasant feeling, not a spiritually pleasant feeling. In fact, that unpleasant feeling that I got from not having chewing gum eventually changed to a spiritually pleasant feeling because I could see it was on the path, and that was joyous, if that makes sense. There's something that are really, really useful to be aware of. Oh, I hope I'm not going over time. Is anybody, I don't even know how long I've been going for. That's okay. There's something called, that's really helpful to know about. It's called the 5 jhana factors. And these are factors that are present when we develop jhanas. And they arise and we can use them as a tool to help us cultivate jhanas. In fact, they're somewhat instructive, in my view. They're somewhat instructive because it works like this. The first factor is called initial application. What this means is that we might sit to meditate and our minds are all over the place. We find something. It could be the tip of the nose with the breathing, and we put our mind there. We initially applicate our mind to that space. Okay, initial application. That's the first factor, putting your mind somewhere, directing your attention at something. The second factor is called sustained application. Sustained applications means staying there, staying there, staying there, staying there, staying there, staying there, staying there. And the third jhana factor is piety, or joy. This is really interesting, and in my experience, I'm spending this morning, or this afternoon, sorry, I was here just focusing on the tip of my nose. My mind was all over the place. I didn't want to stay. But I know if I continue doing that, say if I continue doing that for a couple of days, it'd eventually stay there. And what would arise would be piety. There's this kind of automatic response. It's a factor of it's a factor of the jhanas, but it's also a factor that happens. It's just the process of the mind that happens. And so that's the third, joy is the third jhana factor. The fourth jhana factor is happiness. Remember me talking about the difference between joy and happiness? It's a much more light-hearted experience. It's buoyant, uplifting, more refined. And the fifth jhana factor is one-pointedness. It's called one-pointedness, ekagata in Pali, but there's another way of describing it. It's called unification, unified mind. When the mind gathers around something, it's all going in one direction. So initial application and sustained application, there's some analogies for this. One analogy is striking a bell. Like the strike of the bell is initial application. The ringing of it is sustained application. Or sustained application. Can you get that? There's another analogy that's used, and that is a bird flapping its wings is initial application. It's quite energy, like you have to apply energy. Sustained application is where the bird is holding its wings still and just flowing through the air. There's still energy that's needed, but it's much more, it's a lot less, and it's more like a balance. And another one, seeing we're in Byron Bay, another one I have is because of my attempts at being a surfboard rider. I can stand. I used to be able to stand. I don't know if I can do that anymore. But paddling at the surfboard in the wave, you get the wave coming and you paddle along. Then you feel the wave pick you up, and you stop paddling, you stand up. The paddling is like an initial application. The standing up, the wave catching you, you're standing up and you're surfing down the side of the wave is sustained application. So this is really useful to know. So I was saying before that sometimes I go on retreats and I do emulations of the jhanas, and it's just me going through my own, my own processes to emulate the jhanas, to get a sense of these qualities. And sometimes I might go on retreat and I'll sit for days and days and days and days, just cultivating serenity, and then being attentive to my nose tip, for example. Sounds boring, but it actually gets really, really interesting. It's really, really interesting. But it just gets, there's a lot of interest there, but I'm not analysing it. I'm just being there with it. And this process of the factors of jhanas naturally results in some sort of joy and happiness and contentment and peace. So at my level, it may not be like amazing peacefulness, like, same as the jhanas that are described in the Visuddhimagga or even in the suttas, but they're good for me. They're good for me. At a personal level, it turbocharges my insight practices. Lee Brasington teaches that whenever you do a practice, you might do your practice for an hour or an hour and a half, you finish it with some inquiry. You finish it with an insight, so that you got your mind very clear, and then you can use that power of the clarity to investigate into something, even if it's just perceiving impermanence, or contemplating the 5 recollections, for example, something like that. Okay, so I was on a retreat, other times I'm on retreats. Sometimes I'll just do that process of the 5 factors. Other times I'll bring to mind what it's like to have joy. I'll bring to mind a memory of it. And in that way I'm kind of using the heal approach. And I'll bring to mind, and in my sphere of perception of all sorts of experiences, I can see joy there. And I just kind of hone in on it. And the more I hone in on it, the more it becomes my reality. So it's like I'm using the sign of joy to create the experience of joy. And the same with happiness. So I was one day I was on retreat, it was a couple of years ago. And on retreats I usually do, if I'm doing a long retreat, I usually do a week or 2 of just serenity, so that I can build up the power of my mind and then turn it to other practices. So I was on this retreat and I was just going through that stuff, and I'd think of happiness and joy and happiness, and it was really cool. And then I got to my belly, and if you have a place for contentment in your belly, in your body, it's sort of, I find it in my belly, and Lee Brassington talks about it like that as well. So I'm in my belly and I'm going, oh, contentment, contentment. And what happens is these thoughts of inadequacy arise. And, there's thoughts that, oh, I'm just a fraud. Who am I to meditate? I'm a failure or whatever it is. And it was really, really interesting. And I noted it. I was mindful enough to note it. And I just kind of then turned towards that feeling that I'm actually okay. I am good enough. I am what I am. I'm like Popeye the Sailor Man, I am what I am, that's all that I am. And I'm okay. And there is contentment somewhere there. And so I honed into that contentment. And it grew. That's great. And what I'm saying here is that, my discontent or my sense of inadequacy didn't completely disappear, but it starts to get worn away. It starts to get worn away. It's like the more we do something, the more it becomes our reality. And I think we all need joy, we all need happiness, we all need contentment, and we all need peace. And in fact, we're talking about the Four Truths. There's an English-born monastic who speaks Thai really, really well. And I often listen to his Dharma talks because I can understand Thai. And he was giving a talk in English for this, actually. It was just a little clip. It was just a 3-minute clip. And he was talking to someone. He said, you can't fully realise dukkha with a miserable mind. You have to have a happy mind to realise dukkha. That sounds paradoxical, but it's the truth. Because a miserable mind, you're so encased in your misery, you can't see beyond it. But with a happy mind, you're able to see beyond it. Okay, so I think I've probably talked enough for tonight. Thank you for listening. And may we all be healed and awakened with the collected mind of samadhi.